Thank you very much, Pam. And good day to everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join the conversation today. Something near and dear to all of our hearts, I'm sure, which is serviceability of EV batteries. Special thanks to Pam Walter for setting this up, sponsoring this from MAPconnected. And also, thank you very much, Dave Johnson, former Global Director of Service Engineering Operations at Ford. Thank you. And Julie Johnson, I'm told there's no relation, so we don't know that for sure. But Julie's head of market growth development and growth strategy at Volta Trucks. So thank you very much for taking the time to participate today. So just a quick introduction, just to take it very high up. Obviously, everybody here knows, we're living and breathing it. The EVs are here. It's a very exciting and I would say a creative moment for our industry. And it's just a great time to say, be in the arena, as they say. So, for me, I like to, today really start the conversation around EV serviceability, specifically the costs and service challenges of transitioning to electric vehicle battery service. That's a topic that we're all very much involved in. For Midtronics, for those who don't know, we serve the industry by developing and implementing and providing service solutions around batteries. We've been doing that for 40 years. So this is quite exciting for us because the whole world is talking about batteries as adoption grows. There's huge investment in the industry. Regional regulations and policy are rapidly evolving. So my hope here is to really start a dialogue, and then that continues through these forums to identify the areas within the EV serviceability ecosystem that could benefit from focus and attention and innovation, all the way from upstream, so the design considerations, production, all the way through, importantly, warranty service operations, and all the way downstream to the ownership experience and what it means to own an EV, out of warranty repair, insurance, resale, those things as part of the whole ecosystem. So that's my hope, and I hope that hope is shared by everybody here as well. So thank you very much again for everybody for joining. Just a quick plug to keep in mind. Again, please go ahead and submit any questions you would like us, Pam, Julie, myself to answer in the Q&A, and then Pam will be able to put those out. I'll be fielding 3 of those. And then any general questions, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll do our best offline to answer those when we can, and following up after the webinar. Also, if you could communicate with Pam as well, maybe very interested in knowing why you attended today, and perhaps as we move forward, other topics in the future as we move forward. So I give a first question that'll be both to Dave and Julie, and give an opportunity to introduce yourselves directly. And the question really is, based on that hope is, in your view and substantial experience, both at Ford, Dave, and at Volta, and previously, Julie, and your experience, how does EV serviceability impact cost throughout the ecosystem? Big question, right? But if we take all the way from upstream, all the way to the downstream, what are the impacts to cost when we think about serviceability? And perhaps, Julie, I'll ask you to go ahead and answer first.
Sure. Hi, it's great to be here today. Thank you so much, Pam, for the invitation. Yep, so Julie Johnson, I'm with Volta Trucks. And for those of you that may not know Volta just yet, or if you've heard of us, we are an electric truck OEM and service provider, headquartered in Europe, actually out of Sweden, with operations in the UK and in France, and really a global organization, having launched during COVID. And we're on a mission to really lead and transition the logistics cargo freight space into a zero emission future, with a really big focus, obviously, on safety, with people really at the heart of everything we do. So I'll kind of leave it at that, because we'll talk a little bit more about what we do. And to dive into the question, Serviceability, I've worked in the fleet space for a number of years now, just in my with my background with actually electric vehicles. I had a fleet of electric Class 5 vehicles 4 or 5 years ago, and just kind of coming from the industry, it's this is such an incredible opportunity. The technology itself definitely offers a tremendous future for us when we think about uptime, just given the design of the technology itself. But designing the vehicle to serviceability is a really critical piece, especially when we're thinking about components that are heavy like batteries. I'm very, what I'm used to is, a drop and replace scenario. Everything that we're trying to do is what can we do to ensure that the vehicle has the uptime it needs or that we need to deliver on, and how can we make it better as we move into the future? And then the other critical piece to that too is really monitoring battery health and component health. And so predictive maintenance is a really important aspect as we move forward. And a lot of this is obviously we're building this as we move forward so that we can really understand what can we predict? What can we address from a mobile maintenance service? What can we do that's in field so that we can minimize those catastrophic events that might take a vehicle off the road, especially when it's in operation? And I think when we talk a lot about over the years, we talk about the reduced maintenance cost of these vehicles, and that's a very real reality. But what is really important for everybody to know up front, especially as we're engaging with fleets, is the high touch, hands-on approach that we need to have in this early stage is really important. It's not, we can't let these trucks just go free. We really need to stay close to them. And then the other piece of that is all of this information and these learnings are feeding back through the ecosystem so that we can really kind of understand what roles and responsibilities we need to fulfill, and how do we even build out our own infrastructure of people and resources and skill sets at sort of within every area, every level, so that we can really work in sync. I mean, I like to say, and sometimes I feel bad saying this, but I think it's a reality, is, it's sort of a fragmented space right now, but that's because we're really innovating, and we're innovating really fast. So really creating the sort of integrated approach and working closely together across the ecosystem is just, it's really important. And my big thing is, let's just predict what we can, let's control the controllables, and plan for the what ifs, so that when things do happen that maybe we don't know we're going to bubble up, we can address them as quickly as possible, but really kind of manage the rest of that we sort of know are going to happen. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think what one thing that resonated with me from what you said, Julie, is the insight that the serviceability of EV batteries is quite fragmented right now. And that is it gets down to the essence of the challenge of what are the things that we need to do to kind of start getting more integrated as an industry, to be able to really create value, and get as EVs get adopted. So thank you. Dave, same question. What is the impact to serviceability of batteries to the whole ecosystem?
Thanks, Jason. And it's great to be here with all of you this morning and to take an hour to talk about this. And we could spend days talking about it. I appreciate what Julie said about about that infrastructure, right? And kind of taking it down to the customer end of this. And what does the customer need? And what are the expectations? And walking back from there. I'm going to go from a little different direction and talk a little more about the hardware from my perspective. I am an old Ford, has been, but with that comes quite a bit of experience and a few things that I've learned along the way. So I hope that that will be useful to all of you as you consider what you're doing in each of your individual businesses and operations. As I look at the battery hardware, that when you think about EV, to me, hands down, that is the biggest issue confronting us. both from a technology standpoint and a cost standpoint. And we're, this is about warranty lifecycle. Well, this is one of the big ones, and it's a big mystery to solve. When I look at what I've observed across the industry in terms of serviceability, some have been better than others. In terms of having a battery pack that you can break down, you can get to modules, you can test and analyze which modules may be bad and put those modules back in. When I say modules, I'm thinking battery array modules. And companies like, I'm going to put a plug in here for Midtronics, companies like Midtronics who provide great testing equipment and charging and balancing equipment that's vital if you're actually going to service a battery pack. And I'll say at Ford we had some success, some wins, some losses when you look at it from a pure service perspective to enable us to do some of that. And going back to what Julie said, the easy thing to do would be if you could just do a battery pack swap and send people on their way, that would be wonderful. The problem with that, and on the passenger vehicle side, is, I'm going to use a round number. You're talking about a $20,000 repair. And you start then thinking about, well, what's the value of that vehicle, let alone the impact of that warranty event in terms of your warranty reserves, again, the value of the vehicle, and you start wondering, well, are we in business here? And so those are some of the big challenges you have to confront. Now, the other side of that is, yes, a lot of work has gone in by all the companies that I've observed into having a very good, robust battery pack to work with, because they do recognize the cost. And so they're willing to put a lot of work into having a high quality, reliable battery pack that will provide the longevity you need, which for all of us is around 8 years or so in terms of warranty, but the customer certainly expects more out of it than that. So as I look across that, it's that challenge of, how do I have this balance of having a very robust battery that I can manufacture at a low cost? How do I make it so that it's serviceable to the lowest serviceable component possible, so that I am optimizing my cost? Because even when you break them down and you can repair a component, it's not cheap, but it's cheaper typically than an entire battery pack. And I've seen, I'm close with Ford's strategy around that. I've observed GM seems to be similar in terms of their approach. And then you can get into, well, okay, can I repair it in the shop? Can I ship it back to a central location and refurbish the pack, which is putting components into it, but it's still a used pack? Can I look at remanufacturing? Can I remanufacture an entire pack at a cost that would be effective, which is just taking refurbishment a couple of steps further? And then you get into, well, or can I repurpose that battery into secondary power storage and get some value out of that, and then all the way through to recycling? So all these steps in the chain that my observation is none of us have really cracked the code on that fully. I see Tesla taking a little different direction in terms of going, I'll say, jumping in with both feet into structural battery packs, which essentially means that pack you're stuck with. There's not a lot of serviceability to be done on that pack. That's bold. I had a friend of mine that's in battery development said, yeah, what we're looking at to be able to have a structural battery pack that makes sense and gives you the level of quality you must have to make financial sense out of it is you've got to have 7 sigma levels of reliability. And 6 sigma is phenomenal, right? For those of us that have practiced 6, now they're saying 7. So Jason, I see a lot of challenges across the landscape, a lot of different solutions, as Julie said, fragmented. And I think as people keep talking to each other, the industry is going to converge on a few solutions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dave. I think that's quite insightful. One of the things that's was hitting me is that, when we, getting down to the point where you could service a battery down to the component level to make that service event as easy and less costly as possible. Then when you apply it to something like what Julie is up against, which is the biggest KPI is uptime. So you're going to want to have to change that pack, get that truck running as soon as possible, and then be able to fix it or replace it. But having that fulfillment line ready to go when they're needed is what, and for Midtronics, is what we're seeing is a big issue in the industry. So I think we're at a moment in time here in the webinar. I think if Pam is on, perhaps we could field a question from our from the group here. Pam?
Yes. So we have two questions, actually three questions so far. First one is, how critical do you see the maintenance of the 24-volt battery set to support vehicles, and how does this impact the reliability of the EV pack and vehicle, and how do you see dealers will deal with this?
All right. So for what I'm hearing from that question is that, well, 24 volt, that might be from the European side, right, or the heavy duty side. But I think it's like the low voltage. The electric vehicles still have low voltage batteries, 12 volts or 24 volt, that are running critical. So I think that's what it was. So perhaps Dave or Julie, if you want to.
Yeah, I can take an initial crack at that. And that's a great question. Again, my observations. What I've seen is, and it ties to some other, I think, questions that are out there in the chat about reliability of the packs and what we see. And I'll go back to Mach-E as an example. We went through, there were some growing pains around the battery packs themselves. But again, with all hands on deck, because I'm sure every manufacturer looks at that, quickly addressed a lot of those, what might be relatively small issues, but could be expensive, to help clean that up so that you increase your reliability. Your battery pack failures, where you need an entire battery pack replacement, are truly minimized. But what I've seen, and this may be what the person asking the question is alluding to, is challenges with maintaining the low voltage side, a low voltage battery, and having a robust solution there, and having a low voltage side that will go down, which then can prevent you from starting your high voltage side. And so I'd say that it's critical, and it's critical to maintain those low voltage batteries, because that can shut down the whole system, because of those interactions between the high voltage, the low voltage, and the module that is making decisions about when to push and how much to push towards the low voltage side to keep that battery charged, and is the battery good? So I didn't give you a very detailed answer, but I would just say that I believe that's critical, and it is one of those pieces that will require more work. It's not going to be as expensive as a high voltage pack, but I see it probably being a higher rate of failure, and something that will have to be watched.
All right, thank you, Dave. Julie, do you have anything to add for that?
Yeah, I can kind of jump in here, just based on sort of maybe 4 years ago experience. And again, this is in the medium duty space, but it sort of parallels a little bit with the combustion side of the business, which I was also on. I think about it as in, you have Class 8 tractors that sometimes aren't operating as frequently as they need to be, and the 12-volt batteries are disconnected so that they don't drain. I mean, we have very similar situation with on the EV side as well. I mean, they can be sensitive to certain conditions. How they're utilized and impacted can be, use the word catastrophic, right? Where, if a battery if a vehicle runs out of state of charge, which we know in these early days, I mean, education is an incredible need, and we have to take a lot of great care in ensuring that drivers, any driver, whether it's a light duty or medium heavy duty vehicle, really understand. And I drive an EV. really need to really kind of understand, you know, how do we use our vehicle, and when is it really going to be a pretty major impact if something happens that we could actually avoid as a user of the technology. So prime example is, you know, a vehicle runs out of a state of charge. And these were the early days, obviously, when we were still kind of learning, but, you know, not realizing that the vehicle gets towed back in, you put it on a charger, great, it works. But a day or two later, you know, all of a sudden you come in and, you know, try to start the vehicle, and the vehicle doesn't start. I mean, that I think that piece of it is really important, and we need to understand that when an event happens, what's the protocol to assess the vehicle to make sure that it's going to operate and that there isn't a need to have a component change out. So because, you know, obviously, if these things are happening way too often, it does become costly because you're having to change out a 12-volt or a 20-volt battery. And I think that's a controllable for the industry right now. But you know, what are the opportunities for us to be able to monitor that? Because again, when it comes back to longevity of the vehicle, we know that running out of fuel, I should say, it's not good for any vehicle, but it can be really detrimental to the electric technology. And again, that's a warranty impact. So from my perspective, I think the battery monitoring is really, really important to know what the health of that battery is for the life cycle.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned that earlier too, is that the better we can get at the systems for predictive maintenance, and or even as it follows like periodic technical inspections and things like that, the better we're going to be. All right, good. Good question. Second question that we wanted to put forward to both to Dave and Julie is, if we put on a different hat, perhaps, and we put ourselves in the shoes of the service provider. Say, Dave, in this case, it would be a service manager at a Ford dealership that is committed to selling and servicing the Mach-E, for example. Put ourselves in that service manager head, or with Volta having to service fleets of vehicles and the mobile service side. And then I even in my head put it towards some of the aftermarket groups that are traditionally the service environment. What are the challenges that they're thinking about if we put themselves in their shoes? Like what do they have in their head as challenges and costs, and how they would have to transition? Perhaps Dave, if you want to field that.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with that. So there's a few.
Yeah.
Here's I'm just trying to think where to start here. I'll start with tools and equipment, or maybe let's back up one from that. Your number one consideration with these, and it's this is in terms of in terms of what's new. It's the high voltage aspects of the vehicle, whether it's a passenger vehicle, heavy truck, or whatever it may be, that is the new and big and potentially very dangerous thing if not handled properly by technicians, because they are opening some of those things up. Now, I know that all manufacturers, as far as I know, have gone to great lengths to absolutely minimize that risk. But it's one of those things that it's just absolutely critical. And this is when we get back to the equipment. There's training involved to ensure that technicians and those handling those batteries understand what they're dealing with and how to do it safely. And then there's the equipment, the protective equipment that goes with that. Now, the good news is we've had hybrids around for quite a while, and they are not low voltage. And so there should be some significant, I'll say reasonable experience around handling those. But this is just taking it to a new level, and in terms of the exposure, it's just much greater. So to me, that's always number one, is what you do to make them safe and be able to safely work on them. Well, I talked a little bit about that safety equipment. That's kind of the down payment, if you will, on what's needed to be able to properly take care of these, handle these battery packs. When you start thinking about the sheer weight of battery packs, what you have to do there are specialized lifting tables that are required. When you think about now the logistics within the dealership of just offloading a battery pack from a transport into your storage, or to get it onto a lifting table. At least for passenger car vehicles, you've got to have forklifts are basically required for that. Not all dealers have that. Maybe a little different on the heavy truck side. And then you get into the testing equipment. That's not always cheap. It's just the nature of the beast. And again, if you're going to be actually breaking into packs and doing the balancing and the testing to identify bad modules and replacing those within the pack, it all adds up. And so that's thousands and thousands of dollars. And for dealers, they're always looking at what's my return on investment, and they don't necessarily see the fast return in terms of car sales, because margins are a little tighter on EVs, but the volumes are picking up. And so they have to look at these long-term investments, and that's a real challenge for them. And then again, just what it takes up in terms of bay space. Sometimes you need a bay and a half, if you will, to really manage that if you're dealing with the battery pack. So there's some special considerations there. On the other hand, there's some things that are easy. These things on the passenger vehicle side anyway, it's going to be more tires and suspension in terms of regular maintenance and repair required than anything else. And so there's some things that make it a little simpler on the backside as well. Well, I'll throw in one other thing, Jason, and that is software is becoming such a huge component of this, and manufacturers working to deliver it over the air, which makes things simpler on the customer. If you have a dealer structure, Tesla's a little different animal, but if you have a dealer structure, there's angst there about, am I getting my share of what I would have had in labor with hands-on testing equipment and software update equipment that I may not get now or in the future if it's done over the air. So those are a few of the things that cause some angst for them. And then some of the requirements of the OEMs around charging infrastructure that they say they would need, which is some of the largest investment required, especially if we're asking them to do fast charging. That is a significant sum of money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. If I think what hits me from what you're saying is that obviously first and foremost is safety, right? It's high voltage, so if you're going to provide service, and so that's front and center in everybody's mind. And then secondly is that the jobs that need to get done for dropping packs, moving packs around are different, and so from the investment, they have to think of the business model quite a bit differently. Instead of a longer term horizon for that. So thank you, Dave. Julie, would you like to respond to that question as well, as far as the person providing the service, what are the challenges in their heads?
Yeah, I mean, I do, I do think it's such a disruption. And I think the way that it's being handled today, especially in the medium and heavy duty space, is, the market is still quite small, right? It's not like we've hit this hockey stick curve yet, sort of anticipating that, demand and capacity are going to face off soon. But so I'd say, one of the challenges right now is just volume of vehicles, right? So we can do a lot of this educational support. We can get, what I would refer to as sort of aftermarket specialists that we have today that do a tremendous amount of work on the combustion vehicles and very high skill sets, handling a lot of warranty support. That's from my view, I think that is the future that we're heading into. But to get there right now, we do have to have specialists and identified folks that can work on these vehicles. And when you think about just how many folks do you have to have within the organization, based on a daily schedule and the hours that the business is open, you really have to start building those internal champions and those experts. And then that's sort of how, everybody else sort of starts to learn around the team. And the OEMs play a really critical role in that. I mean, I think it's incredibly important for the OEM and the distribution network, the dealer network, to work very closely together, because we are sort of redefining and trying to figure out sort of what is this model going to look like as we move forward, who handles what, what are we handling today versus what we're going to handle into the future, right? Because we're going to be able to build this out, but it's really important that the OEMs and the manufacturers provide that expert engineering level of support to these organizations, and almost working together. I like to call it sort of virtual integration, right? Where you're you're really kind of working hand in hand, and and there's challenges with that, right? I mean, we it's not like anybody can just walk into the shop. You can't just have an engineer from an OEM necessarily walk into a shop and start working on a truck together. I mean, we there could be some limitations around that. So there's just a lot of dynamics that we're working with, but I think it's really important. And then the other piece of that is everything that's being learned in the field about these vehicles needs to flow back to the OEM and the manufacturer, because that learning is then what it's going to then feed into the optimization of the existing vehicles and the EVs that are out there, and then any development moving forward on new platforms. They can build to those needs and those learnings, because serviceability is so important, and just life cycle management is really important as well. So as we talked about earlier, battery recycling or second life use. I mean, it's great if, to be able to do both. I think we're going to need both pathways, but I've met with a recycling company recently, and just to understand what they manage and what they deal with, and every different pack and how they're built, and what's used to kind of keep them together as one unit. It's not always that easy to be able to take in batteries and be able to extract what you need so that you can actually recycle them. So again, that learning at the market level, at the field level, there's just so much there that we've got to harness. And again, that can feed out through the ecosystem, and again, brings the need for all of us to work together and to figure out, how do we really engage and create these connections to ensure that we're building to a future that's only going to get better from where we are today.
Yeah, excellent. I love that the idea of the EV life cycle, and trying to identify, okay, where do we need to go here? What needs to get propped up and developed? I think Pam raised her hand. Pam,
Yes.
maybe we have a time for another question.
Yeah, I was going to, there's some interesting questions that are coming in from Donovan Ringo. And he wanted to ask Dave and Julie if they thought that OEMs might begin to start leasing batteries to consumers for the life of the vehicle to extend past the warranty period. And if so, how would this impact aftermarket serviceability?
Want me to start on that one? Yeah, Julie and I are both like, I don't want to.
I know, I'm thinking.
The next one, Julie. So you asked an awesome question, and I myself, and I was involved in some battery electric vehicles back in the early 2000s, and so that was the beginning of my exposure. I've had a while to think about things like this, and I'm gonna throw out a few thoughts, and we'll see if any dots connect here. So leasing on one hand sounds like a great thing, because I'm going to back up a little bit. Here's another one of the conundrums, if you will, around EVs, and we're probably going to start speaking to some of what I view as the elephants in the room that we don't talk about. And this is one of the main ones to me. Back in the early 2000s, range was the big issue. Range anxiety, and it was hard to talk about anything else until you could get past range anxiety. Well, I'd say in a lot of ways, and it's still there. It's still there more than I think people maybe appreciate, unless you're in urban areas and that's not such an issue. But it's now you're into recognizing what's really happening when you consume electricity. When you charge that vehicle, the cost that you're paying is not just the cost of the electrons you're putting into the battery. The cost that is being paid by somebody is the the loss of future capacity that that battery has by virtue of you cycling it, right? Batteries wear out, in other words. Battery is another component of fuel. If you want to look at it just fairly technically, you'd say part of my fuel is the electricity that I'm putting into the battery. The other component of the fuel is the battery itself, because that fuel, it's only as good as what I can consume or what I can store and use. And so that's why, we'll say on average, there's this 10, 12, maybe 15-year life on batteries if everything goes well. And then there is I think of it as a balloon payment due. At the end of the time that battery is consumed, let's assume that it gets through warranty, it's performed really well. You get to year 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there, and that battery is no longer viable. And now you need to replace that battery. Well, that's a big issue, right? So now, and that's that balloon payment. So now let's go back to leasing, because to me, I always thought, well, that would be really attractive, because people now see that, you're paying for this all along, and essentially we're going to guarantee you a lifetime of battery, no matter what happens, and you're just going to pay a fixed price. Okay, so a couple of problems with that I have seen, and why I haven't seen it become prominent. It was done in China. I think it's Ion was the company that was doing that. Where essentially, you just paid separately for the batteries, and that was a monthly fee. I'm not sure if they're even still doing it, but all of a sudden, as a consumer, the consumer now recognizes, oh, I'm paying for a car and I'm paying for a battery, and what when you combine those two together, you probably see that there's a big chunk that is going towards that battery. How the consumer perceives that, accepts it, that's one issue, right? Because now they're starting to have, I'll say, very transparent visibility to the cost of fuel over the long term. The other thing that I see is you have to, as the one doing the leasing, you want to make money on it, right? You don't want to lose money. How do you know the state of health of that battery over time, and how quickly the consumer, the vehicle will consume it? The answer is you don't really know. You may know to a degree. There's things we're doing to infer it. Midtronics and others are very much into being able to determine state of health of a battery, which is vital. That's vital when you start thinking about residual values of vehicles, for instance, and what that will mean. So there's a whole nother can of worms you get into there. But I think that the other piece of that is when you're leasing that, as the one doing the leasing, do you have a predictive capability to understand when that battery is going to fail, so you know how much you need to charge, so you can charge the customer a fair price, have some margin, and make it attractive enough for a customer to want to do that. So what I did is lay out a whole bunch of the problems, kind of the moose head on the table, as we like to say sometimes. And I don't think that I haven't seen myself firm answers to that, which is why I don't think we've seen people really dive in heavily into leasing at this point. Julie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think, and this was something I think we were looking to, I was going to touch on a little bit later in the dialogue, but, I think, a lot of, on the fleet side, there's definitely a big focus for companies, especially those that have owned their fleet of vehicles, and there's some pretty large fleets out there, and they have full ownership of their vehicles, just moving into the EV space and having to face this transition. And for everybody, it's a really big transition, but especially if you've got a very large fleet. I think leasing in general, the whole vehicle is a big consideration for a lot of companies, and that's just, it really is focusing today on mitigating risk and creating sort of that really sort of tight partnership engagement, which exists today, But I do think, it's a different scenario. It's not with a vehicle technology that's tried and true that we've known for, how long. But I can't say that it hasn't happened, because there has been battery leasing in the space over the last 5-6 years, right? I think I believe maybe on the transit side, I don't want to speak out of turn, but so I think it's just, it's testing, right? There's just a lot of different, testing models to see what works, what's going to help drive adoption, because we just don't have the history yet. So we're building the history together. But, I'm always a proponent that, everybody has to have skin in the game, right? I mean, you got to spread the risk around. You can't really throw the risk on one industry. We've sort of got to be into it together. And I think that's a lot of how the organization is, the industries in general are navigating. But residual value is a really big question, right? You've got people that are bullish on so many different pathways. Are we recycling? Do we have a huge opportunity to place these batteries in storage? I mean, the batteries in commercial trucks are big. They're big, they're big, and there's a lot of kilowatt hour in there. But the big question is, what is an 8 to 10 hour duty cycle, or a truck that can operate 2 or 3, 2, maybe even 3 shifts a day if you figure out your charging infrastructure to support that. But then the big question is, well, if you're, DC fast charging these batteries all the time, are you going to see faster degradation and shorter life cycle? So, I think, the great thing is we've got a big fleet world out there, and there's a lot of pilot programs happening all over the industry, and there's a big focus on batteries, especially I think on the recycling side. The DOE is definitely doing a lot of investing, which I think is really important. And we've got to be able to have credible data that we can go to and really start to sort of understand what we can do with these batteries. I mean, I think 4 years ago, I met with a company that was building a solution that was monitoring batteries, and, there could be evidence that we can bring health back into these batteries. I mean, it kind of sounds crazy when you think about it, but conditions are really important. And if we can start to understand what those perfect conditions or what those good conditions are, it's like our bodies, right? You can't have extremes happening all the time, because, our organs don't like that. I think it's very similar from a battery perspective. They like to be at an ambient temperature, and can we achieve that in a vehicle that's operating, 8 to 16 to 24 hours a day, and how much can we stress them from a charging infrastructure perspective? And I think, the more we kind of find that happy medium, we want to push these vehicles as much as we can. We want to maximize them. And I'm excited to see where we head with this, because I think it's going to be incredibly important that they address, noise issues that we face throughout the nation. You can operate these vehicles at night, which helps to reduce vehicle miles traveled, so minimizing congestion. I mean, there's a lot of great opportunity when these vehicles are put into what I call the playgrounds that they have fun in, and where they really perform today. So, I think we've got a lot that's going to be coming to the forefront, and the data is not always there when it's actually in the testing mode. But there's a lot of great opportunity out there that we're going to start to learn about. It's already starting to come to the surface now, so stay tuned.
What I like, Julie, that's some great insights too, where you think about the concept of that. There's a lot of new and different models and business models, and how to address this problem, and the ability to explore a bit and pilot is really going to be important to us. And what I really like is that idea of like, hey, in general, let's address the elephant in the room, and which is the big one, as you said, Dave, is what happens to these batteries at end of life? Who's going to bear that cost for replacing that battery? And then there's opportunity there, right? Because when we talk about recycling and then even being able to grade these batteries and say, what are they good for? You know, talking with like salvage yards around the world, they get a battery, a high voltage battery, and they're like, they think of it as a liability because it's of the safety, where they just don't know how to judge where's the market for it. What do I do with this battery? Is there someone that would buy this battery or refurbishment? So I think that it's good that we're kind of converging in on that's an area of the industry I think that could use a lot of focus and innovation as well.
Yeah, we can't solve for one major challenge and issue for humanity and create a lot
Create
of
another one.
others.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we've
Yeah.
got to kind of look at it from a holistic perspective, and I think that there's a lot of that happening. But I will say, the one really important piece, though, is that, you know, there's nothing more powerful for a company than actually adopting the technology at whatever capacity they can, because the learnings that come from
Yeah.
their operations is very different. So that is the
Right.
one thing, is like, you know, sitting back and kind of waiting for everything to come to the surface. You know, you can sort of wait, but the reality is you got to get started. And that's always my big message.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of it because when you think of just recycling, you know, in the lead acid battery world, which we've been over 100 years with lead acid batteries, and you know, if I'm not mistaken, which I often am, I think it's the lead might be the number one most recycled element on Earth. It's almost purely, it just goes right back into production, and we got there after 100 years in the industry. To that point where, yeah, we replace batteries all the time. People know the value of them. Everybody knows what to do with them. The lead acid batteries, and it goes back another battery. I think the battery in my car, someone told me that goes, there's lead ions in there that were probably in your grandfather's car.
Wow.
If you think about it. So that just gives me hope that the industry can get there. It's about developing these models and capabilities and technologies. So we're honing in a little bit towards the end of this, so we got about 8 minutes left. So I think it might not be a bad idea to ask Pam if there's any other like interesting questions that have come through that perhaps we could field. If not, then I can ask a couple other questions on my list as well. But Pam, is there anything that else that has come through?
Well, perhaps our speakers can decide where they want to go. There has been some questions posed about technician shortage and training requirements, as well as there's a question about roadside assistance. How that might be changing and how to support EVs. And then there's another question. Well, maybe go with two of those for now.
Yeah. Yeah, the roadside assistant ones is kind of interesting, especially for Julie, because you had mentioned, I think that there's, you know, looking at Volta, from what I saw, that there's an interesting model that Volta's putting out that is the TAAS, the truck as a service, right? And I think some of that is predicated on the ability for mobile service. So if you think of roadside and mobile, you know, that's quite interesting on how could that look with electric vehicles.
Yeah. So we are providing that as a sort of an innovative service, sort of an integrated solution offering, I like to call it. And you know, I think there's tremendous value in an OEM supporting a model like this, because it will be one offering and a broader scope of being able to support a market which is also having a third party network of maintenance support as well, because we know that, you know, fleets are everywhere and you need to be able to be everywhere. But you know, being able to offer this, you know, we're providing the truck, supporting the charging infrastructure, and then also supporting the maintenance, insurance. You know, really, we can provide a fully integrated solution to a customer. And I think from a maintenance and service perspective, it puts us at, you know, at the bird's eye view of exactly what's happening with that vehicle. I mean, we're not I mean, we're operating them obviously because we're doing all of the testing, but I mean, it puts us right in the heart of how are these vehicles doing? What is happening with them? Because when you have a roadside failure, I mean, another elephant in the room, like there's no reason to hide behind these. Is you got to tow that truck out. You know, can we get to? I mean, if it needs to be towed, obviously, but you need to be able to do diagnostics. I mean, if you can diagnose that vehicle and it just threw a code, and you can do a reboot and that's the beauty of this. Sometimes we talked about software earlier. Sometimes it can just be a software glitch. And I'm not saying that this happens it happens all the time, but take a case in point, you can diagnose it. Oh, okay, great. We could do a quick little reboot and boom, the vehicle's back on the road again. And I think the diagnostic piece to that is what we also have to work to, which we talked about, that came up in one of our earlier questions is, what kind of diagnostic tools are we developing, even with over-the-air updates? You really want to be able to take care of a situation right away. And if we can solve these situations with a quick solution, I mean, that's the beauty of this. If it's catastrophic, that's another situation. But like, how do we get to a place where, we don't want to have roadside failures. We'd rather predict them before they happen. But we just know in logistics, there's just a lot of things that happen that we just can't predict. I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you're in. It could be a tire, it can, whatever. There's so many different elements. But if it really is, from a battery perspective, there's like we talked about load balancing being a challenge. We want to be able to get those vehicles back on the road. And I think that stands for light duty vehicle as well, right? I mean, we want to avoid any interruption in somebody's day. So I think for our truck as a service model, I'm very excited about it because I think the learning that we will get is going to be really incredible. And then we'll be able to feed that back into the technology and continue to optimize and support the customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. And I think the other question that Pam had put out there, obviously with Dave, with the launch of the Mach-E, and obviously, we were with Ford during that. And, I'm thinking of the probably one of the biggest challenges that maybe you could speak a little bit to that I thought was just the training aspect of it and the knowledge base and getting people up to speed, and then think about expanding that to a whole industry. So maybe any thoughts or insights around like how do we get education down?
Yeah, and I know we're pretty much out of time, but I think so. To me, it's not doing it just the old way all the time, right? Some of those old methods are still tried and true and work. But for example, for us with battery electric, we jumped into some 3D, some virtual reality training because very expensive assets you're talking about, right? And physically huge and all of these things, and yet fairly straightforward in terms of removing and putting things together and back to safety again. That there's a lot that can be done in that virtual world, and so it kind of fits with the advancement of technology and seeing a place for some of our new technologies around virtual reality and augmented reality and using that to train technicians. And this ties into the technician shortage question that came up as well. We have to change people's perception of what it means to be a technician because it is changing. Yes, we're going to have internal combustion engine vehicles with us for a long, long time. We're talking all about EVs today, and it represents less than 5% of the market. So there's that reality. But all of these things that we need to learn are new muscles, as I think of it. We need to exercise to be able to take care of these vehicles going into the future. Will benefit us on the internal combustion engine side as well. And as we try to bring new people into this industry, there's some new skills needed. It's not just being greasy all the time. In fact, there's less and less of that than ever before. What we're looking for, I believe, is robotics people that are into robotics. That's what these vehicles are. And now you add the battery component to it, even more so than ever before. And so our ability to attract those people with that mindset, a very heavy emphasis on electrical and electronics, understanding high voltage and making sure they're trained safely and you taking advantage of the technology we have, to me, plays very well with this rising generation of youth that will be our future technicians.
Right. working on robots. I kind of dig it.
Yeah, and the
Excellent.
inflation, I'll say one thing, the Inflation Reinvestment, excuse me, Act has built in funding for, I'm losing my voice here, for training. And
Yeah.
so, OEMs and manufacturers that provide that level of sort of dedicated line support, so I think there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes to build curriculums and pathways to really kind of help sort of bring forward that new learning and skill set. So just something to be aware of.
Well, thank you.
Well said.
We're at the top of the hour. We're a little bit over. So again, thanks to Pam for the opportunity to really get the conversation going and to host. It's great to talk to you, Dave and Julie. Just real quick again, looking forward to October and for us to all meet together. And I think, as again, Pam had asked, that be really interested to hear from anybody who's attending here to send a notice to, like, why did you attend? What interests you? And perhaps other topics for conversations like this. We're coming together in between now and then. Those would be really great. And from my end, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you
Yes,
very
thank
much,
you.
brother and sister Julie and Dave. Thank you, Jason. And I will be back with a recording of this exchange next week with some try and keep connected with you and MAPconnected. And as Jason says, we're here to help facilitate dialogue, and if there are other topics and areas that we can deep dive into other virtual events, as well as in October at the conference, please just reply to any of the many emails that I have sent your way. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.